as I mentioned, oh, thank you. Thank you. Y'all, we're going to record this call today because we're having lots of smart, interesting people on this panel and we want to capture what they say. So Mel, if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen, because this is a new community, because a lot of us are coming together from across the country, we set up a list of cultural agreements that we use generally whenever there's some sort of food systems leadership network convening, and they were created with a lot of input from a lot of members of the network, and they're just meant to sort of remind us how we want to engage with each other when we're in these spaces. We come from different communities, we come from different backgrounds, we don't necessarily have those same trusting relationships you might have with the folks that you work with every day. So these are just a kind of reminder of how we want to be and engage with each other in these food systems leadership network spaces. I'm going to give everybody a minute to read these through, and then I might highlight a couple that are my favorites. All right. Today we are talking about working with BIPOC farmers, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color farmers. So I think one thing that's going to be really helpful in this conversation is to challenge assumptions, to respect differences, and to speak from our own experience. Another one is meeting each other where we are. I think that's always a really kind way to treat other people as we're learning how to best approach work that can be really complicated. So those are just some riverbanks, as we like to call them, that help guide our conversation, and we'll revisit them again and again in this call series, just because it's a nice reminder of some tools to help us be in community together. Mel, if you want to cut that slide. So on to the topic at hand. Guys, I'm on a laptop and I'm used to being on two screens, so I have a lot of small windows. Okay, so as I said, this is a monthly call series. We had our first one last month, and we spent a lot of time with expert facilitation by Andy and Ava, talking about what people want out of this group. And we know that this is a group made up of a lot of experienced, creative, driven people who are doing really cool work in their own communities where they live. And we heard a lot about in that conversation last week around what people are interested in this group was relationship development, reaching out to communities that you don't necessarily work with, building relationships with new types of farmers, and particularly building relationships with farmers who identify as BIPOC. So for this month's call, we are going to do a little bit less of the sort of group conversation and a little bit more sort of a panel style interview with three folks who are doing that work, who are reaching out to farmers who are maybe producers themselves. And they're going to share some of their own experiences of building relationships and also some pitfalls, also some best practices to help folks when they're trying to start new relationships with farmers who identify as BIPOC, to not reinforce some of those negative tokenizing or exclusionary or exploitative patterns that exist in a lot of food systems in a lot of our country, and particularly can be really intense when you're a farmer of color and people are approaching you all the time wanting to work with you, and you don't necessarily know if you can trust them or if they have the right intentions. With that in mind, we do have this panel. We're going to hear from them for about half an hour, 40 minutes. And then there's plenty of time for questions at the end. And because we know that you guys are all doing this work too, there's plenty of time too for you all to share what you've learned and some of your own experiences, because this is definitely a very complex topic and we want to hear from a lot of folks about what they've learned in developing relationships with BIPOC farmers in their own work. And with that, I'm going to introduce my colleague, Elizabeth Atwell, who has been very involved in the back-end development of this project and this community of practice, but is just back from a 4-month sabbatical adventure. So is jumping back in, kind of trying to merge onto the highway here. And Elizabeth can introduce themselves.
Hey, y'all, and thanks, Ellie. My name's Elizabeth. I live in Durham, North Carolina, but I'm actually off religion here in person with Ellie Bonstein. I'm excited to be working with Ellie and Melanie and Ava and Andy to help facilitate this awesome community of practice. And We're going to have a great conversation today and are excited to learn from Buck and Jake and Cecilia with our amazing facilitator, Melanie. But before we do, we want to take a minute just to have an opportunity for folks to get to know each other. So I invite you to just like look on your screen for a minute. We got a lot of names. We're going to go to breakout rooms in a minute. So if you're willing to add a face to your name and turn on your video, that is most welcome. And just look around and like take stock, y'all. We have about 60 people on the call right now that all have a ton of wisdom and a ton of great ideas and a ton of energy to bring to this work. So we're really excited to hear from and really highlight the wisdom of our panelists, but please keep in mind that like everyone here is an ally, everyone here is a teacher, and that you yourselves are too. So we want to create a space just to like get people talking before we start listening to our panelists. So we're going to go quickly for just about 10 minutes into breakout groups of 3. And we've got 2 questions. The first is just a round of introductions. And the question we're going to ask you to just sit on is introduce yourself and maybe say in about a minute, let's give everyone about a minute to speak, what is really important for others to know about your work? I'm going to drop these in the chat. And then our next question is going to be about trust, because we're going to talk a lot about trust today. And so ask you to just deliberate, what does it look like? What does it feel like when you trust someone that you have let me get the rest of that, a working or professional relationship with? Because I think a lot of times when we think about what does trust look like, we think about like our family or our best friends or our partner. But what does trust look like when you're at your job? What does trust look like when you have a financial or professional relationship with someone? So it's 3:10 right now. We're going to go until 3:20. And Melanie, are you good on the breakout rooms? Great. And we'll send those questions back through over the chat. And we'll see y'all back here in about 10 minutes. Too. So we talked a little bit about trust. Is there anyone that would be willing to share what came up for them in their group, or anything that was shared that really resonated with you, or any aha moments you had listening to your friends and peers? We'll invite maybe 2 or 3 people to come off mute and share. If you don't want to share, just raise your hand. And if you're more comfortable typing your thoughts in the chat, that is also totally welcome. What does trust look and feel like in a professional relationship? Thanks, Gazem.
I think that in our group, being authentic came up a lot, in a sense that when you do have trust, you can show up as your authentic self, but when you don't, it's very hard to do that. Yeah.
And some nods with authenticity. What else? Could we hear a couple more voices? Hey, Sarah. Yeah.
Hi. So in my group, we didn't quite touch on the trust necessarily, but I think one thing that we talked about was pricing, being kind of open sourced for farmers to tap into what is wholesale and retail prices versus it being sort of like hoarded from other entities that are purchasing. And so there's kind of like this lack of trust because there's not a lot of open sourcing for that. So having that more readily available for, and obviously it's gonna be different from state to state, but it shouldn't be that different, but just having that, okay, now I'm just babbling, but the resource sharing and openness to have those conversations and not gatekeep it.
Right. So transparency around pricing, transparency around how decisions are being made, transparency around values. I think we're going to hear a lot about transparency with our panel today. We hear from one more. Hey, Susan. Okay, let's do Heidi and then Susan.
I appreciated the two people that were in my group both said the same thing, that the importance of just showing up in order to build trust with those who you are working with, and just showing up and showing up and showing up so that they know they can depend on you.
Awesome, thanks. Susan, you want to close us out?
Yeah, sure. This was such a helpful message for me today, that when someone shares hard feedback or critical feedback, that is a sign of trust. And it was such a helpful reframe for me, because sometimes it's hard to receive tough feedback, but just remembering that means that person respects me and trusts me enough to share that with me, that I would be able to receive it. So that was really awesome.
That's a good one, and a good thing to hold in our hearts and minds. It's hard to hear hard feedback, but yeah, you're right. That is kind of a compliment. Okay, so just to recap a couple that we heard: authenticity, transparency, showing up and showing up and showing up again, and being willing to share and receive hard feedback. Great. Well, let's see if we hear some of those things come up in our call with the panelists. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to our facilitator, Melanie Edwards, to get us started.
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. All right, so I am bringing our wonderful guests into the spotlight here, and I'm really excited to invite Buck, Jake, and Cecilia to the conversation today. All right, I think everyone's on spotlight, right?
Yes, but
So
you aren't, Mel. Can you spotlight yourself?
I think I can. Yes. All right, there we go. So hello, and thank you for choosing to spend your time with us this afternoon. We're really excited to have all of your expertise and around this conversation of how to create relationships with BIPOC farmers. And so I think that this is like a really important conversation to be having, as we have a lot of programs that are now focusing on purchasing and sourcing food from BIPOC farmers, where they may have been left out of conversations previously before. So I'm really hoping that this will be an organic conversation and that you all engage with each other. Feel free to chime in, have follow-up questions or comments. And we're going to start off with a few questions, and we're going to make some time at the end for the audience to ask questions. And as we go along, if something comes up for you, please put it in the chat. We know that the audience also has like an amazing wealth of information and knowledge on this, and we would love to hear all of your experience as well. So if anything comes up for you, please pop it in the chat. But to start, I just want to welcome you all again, and I would love for you each to start by giving like a very quick overview of your work and what is the unique context of the farmers you work with are operating in. Cecilia, you're off mute. Did you want to start or kick us off?
Oh yeah, sure. I didn't notice that I was on mute.
It's okay.
Yeah, so my name is Cecilia. I'm actually the owner of a local food hub here in California, in the Bay Area and Monterey County. We actually started this food hub during the pandemic. I started volunteering for one of the nonprofits, and then it was just, I don't know, it just continued. I liked doing the work. So our food hub is mainly, we work with Latino undocumented farmers, organic farmers. We try to keep it to that, just because the relationship that I have built with the Latino community, it's a little different because I'm also Latina. And so I'm able to have, again, that trust with them. And it was easy for me to build that relationship with them. I think it has a lot to do with me being Latina also. And yeah, basically I just work with local Latino farmers that grow organic. And they're small farmers here in San Francisco and in Monterey County. So that's pretty much it.
Thank you. Jake and Buck, I would love to have you join the conversation and, you know, tell us a little bit about your work and the unique context of the farmers you work with.
Yeah, I can go next. My name is Jake. I'm in Providence, Rhode Island, and I work for Southside Community Land Trust. We're an urban farming organization that does everything from produce aggregation, which is my job, to youth programming, to land access work. And so my role is really running the day-to-day operations of our aggregation program, where we buy from small scale farmers in the Providence area, most of whom grow on land that we own either in urban gardens or there's a few suburban properties. And so we buy from these farmers at pretty close to market rate and then sell that food to food access organizations in the area. I think that the interesting aspect of our work, or what makes it unique, is that everyone we're working with is from an immigrant background. A lot of folks are like fairly new to the US in the past 10 to 15 years. And so if it weren't for our work like with land access and making sure that people not only have like the urban garden plots, but then also the suburban plots for people that are interested in like scaling up, I think that a lot of these folks wouldn't even have the opportunity to farm, just because, you know, the price of farmland in this state is so high. And so yeah, it's interesting because of that.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you, Cecilia and Jake. Thanks, Melanie, for giving me this opportunity to be on the panel. I maybe come from this a little bit different because I'm not from a farmer. I represent, but I do have some farming and working with BIPOC farmers and things. So, but a little bit about my work. My name is Buck Jones. I'm an Old Cayuse tribal member. I'm one of the bands of the Confederate Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation in Eastern Oregon. I'm employed, have been employed with Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission since 2004 in various capacities. The latest being salmon, the salmon marketing person for us. So the 4 tribes that we represent, they're kind of like we're an extension of the tribe. So they're kind of our bosses. Is my tribe in Warm Springs in Oregon, Yakima Nation in the state of Washington, and Nez Perce tribe in Idaho. So we have treaty fishing rights along the Columbia River that have, you know, we've been here since time immemorial doing that. And salmon is not a is not just a commodity to us. It is culturally relevant to our people. You know, we have first food ceremonies, and when the salmon come back, you know, the salmon was the first one to give up its life for our people. You know, it goes out in the ocean and swims around in 3 years and comes back, and it nourishes our body. And then in our creation stories, and then in the stories of the salmon, that really kind of leads on to what we're all talking about. We have to be good stewards of the land, and being good stewards of the land is, you know, is really being impacted now with global warming and high water temperatures and things like that. You know, we got to take care of the tributaries where they go, because salmon has amazing life. You know, will spend you know, half of its life, if two-thirds of its life in the ocean, and then has a homing mechanism to come hundreds of miles up in fresh water, you know, as an agronomous species that can live in both salt water and in fresh water, and then find the gravel where it was born. And so that's really makes it unique. And so I think in my role in First Foods is bringing the tribal food sovereignty into that, and that has allowed me to be involved in a lot of various things, a lot of national and regional tribal food sovereignty movements. And how I can tie this into farming is that pre-COVID, I was a part of a group called Prosper Portland, that was composed of BIPOC farmers in the Portland metro area. And so we got a group, and these farmers got a grant. And then, you know, my role is in it is saying like, hey, Buck, you know, you guys get a lot of that salmon, you know, it's really good fertilizer, you know, the guts and stuff like that. So like, how can we tap into that or whatever? Then COVID hit, but COVID really kind of changed us too, you know, because like I said, we're putting salmon back in the river, but we started having these meetings or whatever. And as if you remember, you know, markets were shut down. You couldn't get toilet paper, you know, food security became real, you know. What actually turned us is that we had a tribal member pass that was a staff with cryptic and COVID. So it made it real. So it wasn't like happening in Far East China or in Kirkland, Washington. It made it like, well, this is real. This is really happening. So we just real quick, a Gorge Native American collaborative meeting between multiple groups started, and I was like, how can we get food for our tribal members that live along the river? How can I get them food, you know, when food's hard to come by or whatever? And so that led into working with a group that's started doing culturally relevant food boxes for our tribal members, because a lot of our tribal members are lactose intolerant. So I can drink milk, but a lot of my tribal members cannot drink milk. So there's no use getting a food box that has a bunch of dairy products in it. So we start putting culturally relevant food to our things, and that was just one piece of that. So I could go on, but I
Thank
think I'll
you.
stop there.
No, that's actually perfect. It actually leads us into our next question. And Cecilia and Jake, if you have something to add to this, and which is like, you know, tell us about the values and the motivation guiding your work. And Buck, thank you for painting that really great picture to, you know, kind of talk about, you know, what like part of what is guiding you to do this work. I know that was more like a huge moment in all of our lives where it was like, oh, like this work really needs to be done and needs to be done now. But so like, I'm curious to hear a little bit about from Jake and Cecilia, if you have something to add to that. Tell us about the values and motivation guiding your work with other BIPOC, Latin and immigrant farmers.
I guess I can go first. So for me, I mean, I come from a Mexican family, and my parents were farmers. Even back in Mexico, we grew our own food, and that was important to us. And then here in the States, honestly, I wasn't really concerned about that until the pandemic hit. And then what motivated me to do this was hearing a lot of the farmers that I was talking to during my volunteering time. and what they were saying about trusting buyers, because they're Latino, they don't speak the language, they don't speak English, they're undocumented, and they're scared if like a buyer comes and asks for produce and then they don't want to pay them. They're scared to go ask the buyer because they're undocumented and scared about getting deported. And so that for me, it hit, it like drove me to actually want to do this type of work, because I mean, my family at one point, my parents were undocumented at one point. And so I felt connected to that. I felt like I had to do something about it too. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I think for my organization, this program has been around a little bit longer than I've been with the organization. And the initial inspiration behind it was that we have farmers who are very interested in farming. A lot of them grew food in their country of origin. And so they get this access to land and they want to be farmers. And there's like a few farmers markets around the city, but that's not going to make, that's not going to be someone's like livelihood if you're selling at this market and this market. And then especially because there's about like 2 or 3 big ethnic groups that are interested in farming in Providence, they end up growing all the same foods. And so there's a lot of like West African foods. There's a lot of like Hmong, like Southeast Asian foods. And so there's a lot of competition in the markets, and that just doesn't work in terms of trying to build businesses. So we thought that we could really tap into the wholesale market by selling to food access organizations, selling to restaurants, maybe selling to schools. As we've grown some, we've really honed in on the food access piece of it, and then also food is a medicine. And we have a program called VeggieRx, which is teaming up with local clinics who identify folks who are either food insecure or at a higher risk for like diet and lifestyle based illness. And then they'll get a certain number of like $15 shares per year. Yeah, so it's I think it really started from trying to build businesses, but it's taken on this whole life of its own. Also trying to address community health.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. Jim, did you, excuse me, Buck, was there anything that you wanted to add to that comment? Question?
No, I think I kind of did good or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm also involved in a gorge grown food network that I'm a board member of, and we're really trying to get our VeggieRx program going too, so to actually probably have a health organization lead that instead of the gorge grown. So I appreciate hearing that, Jake. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm so happy to have you all here today. As farmers, as stewards of the land, as fishers. I also have a background in farming. And, one of the things that I found really helpful in building relationships with either buyers or organizations that want to purchase with you from me is building trust and having trust in these relationships. And so I'm wondering if you would all be willing to share, what is the role of trust in working with farmers of color? And maybe like, what are some of the components of building trust?
I'll tackle that. I appreciated that when it was at the beginning of this, before our panel started. Trust, trust is our Native people are, we have some hesitancy and interest because of what's happened to our people throughout history. The government, took away our lands and promised us things in treaties, and then didn't uphold those treaties, and so that makes it really hard. They stole our lands and then built their country on, on people of color, of using them as slaves and things like that. And I just want to be honest, I'm not gonna cut it. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it because I think that's the truth. So up until a current day or whatever, and I think is what was kind of mentioned or whatever. I mentioned those groups or whatever, and how we go out and do different uh outreach to our tribal members. Be present, be there, go out and get to know the people as people, not as a problem, not as like, oh, look at that dirty place over there or whatever. Be present and be a part of them, become a known entity, become a known face, knowing that they have they're just like you. We put our socks on the same way or whatever, and get to know them as people, and then they become trusting in that, and that's like the very first step for us. And we've seen it. We call it a healthy risk. Take a healthy risk. Go into another person's environment. Break bread with them. Feed their dogs. Just any little things like that mean a lot or whatever. It may not mean a lot to a lot of other cultures, and it may not mean nothing, but that's what I would say.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Cecilia and Jake, anything that you would like to add?
I think from my side, I think at the beginning when I started working with farmers, they were a little bit hesitant because of the history behind it. Like, they've had many occurrences where they couldn't trust the buyer. And so when I came into the picture, they were, even though I'm Latina, they still were a little bit hesitant about, because I'm a different, like, since the majority of the farmers that I work with are from indigenous backgrounds. They're Latino, but they are more indigenous. And so between Latinos, there's like racism happening in between, who's lighter and who's darker. And so when I started to communicate with them, they were a little bit hesitant because I didn't look like them, even though I was Latina. And so that trust just built more when I started asking them what their concerns were. Like, what is it, something that I can help with, since I also speak the language, my parents, and I started opening up about also my parents being undocumented, me coming from that background and not from a different background than they are. And so now they feel like there's a safe space where they can talk about their needs, and I can talk about my needs as a buyer, and we can agree on something. So yeah, that was important.
Yeah, I think from my experience, the barrier to trust, I think, was a little bit easier because my organization has been around for like 40 years, and we have a lot of experience with these growers, and they know multiple people in the organization. That being said, I felt like folks were a little bit lukewarm at the beginning, and I really had to show, I think, that I was there for them and that I was on top of things. So trying to be clear, like very transparent about what the processes are, why they're getting paid a certain way, saying like, hey, like, I know this isn't the best, but, like, I was advocating for you. I think that all of those things help to build trust, so that even if I can't give someone exactly what they want, like, they know that at least I'm considering, I'm considering what they're bringing, just like Cecilia said, I'm considering their concerns. And I think it goes the same way for purchasers. A lot of those relationships are either like partnerships from the beginning of that program, or it's like a long-standing partnership. But just in terms of maintaining it, I've been trying to be really transparent, or if there's an issue with produce, as will happen with organic produce, it's like, oh, I'm sorry, like I'll refund you for that, my bad. Like, I just try to be transparent, and I think that that's maintained them pretty well.
Thank you. I think this is like a perfect opportunity to also say, like, and Cecilia, you really touched on this, is that, working with BIPOC farmers, whether it's like a person of color working within their own community or someone else working with BIPOC, any of the many diasporas that there are, is that we're not a monolith. Each community, each different group has their own needs and questions and ways to build relationship with them. And I think that's like a really important thing to think about when approaching anyone, just because you approach one group of color and you gain trust with them, and then you go out and approach another group of color who might be in that same diaspora, they might have a different way to build trust with them. And I think it's just something always really important to keep in mind. And I really appreciate you sharing that, Cecilia. Before we open it up to the audience, I want to just ask one more question. And I'm just wondering if any of you have like an example of a failure that you've seen or experienced, and what was the impact and what were the lessons learned from that as you're building these trusting relationships?
I can lead this off. I'm gonna go to the kind of broad on this or whatever. So there was access denied of tribal farmers in grant opportunities from the USDA, and it became some plaintiffs actually took it up to the Supreme Court or whatever, and it called a keep eagle settlement. And so this is just a history of people of color and tribes being denied by the United States government and denying access. And just recently, they came out with the same thing with people of color, of Black farmers, being denied access. This is something this is their own history, than their own things that they've like tried to keep us down and under. I look at it, we went through a lot of traumatic history and stuff like that, when people came, we're savages and stuff like that. Well, our people were farmers. We was astronomers, we had irrigation fields, set up and things like that. And it's kind of coming back around traditional economical knowledge. We've always had that or whatever, but that's what I would say. That's a huge failure on the USDA. And if for a Supreme Court case to go all the way and become that became that settlement, the Keeps Eagle, a multi-billion-dollar award of that's an example of a failure. And that's an example to all if they're saying that for Black farmers too, that's a failure.
Jake or Cecilia, did you have anything to add to maybe when you were trying to build a relationship and it was unsuccessful? What was the impact? What are some lessons learned that we could take away from that? And Buck, thank you very much. And if you're all not familiar with some of the lawsuits he was speaking about, for African-American farmers, it was Pickford versus Glickman, there were 2 class action lawsuits filed by Black farmers against the USDA. So look that up if you have some time. And Buck, did you know the name of the other one by any chance? Do you mind popping that in the chat? Thank you.
I guess for me, I haven't had any major problems from the time that I started working with farmers. But I think that I agree with Buck. I think that the system has failed us dramatically, especially people I look at the farmers I work with, and they're doing their best to protect the planet. like not spraying pesticides on their food, on the stuff that they're growing. Their practices are very they're actually good for the environment. They don't over mass product produce and feed us these like junk vegetables, but they still get the lowest paying price. Like they don't get that much for their produce, even though they're the ones that are actually helping the world. You see all these like big ag companies who are like multi-billionaires. They're the ones that are destroying the planet. And so for me, that's like a big stab in the back. Like, you're the one that's trying to help the world, but you're getting pretty much nothing. So yeah.
Yeah, I have two examples that come to mind. More so like interpersonal type of failures. One happened last week where I have these farmers, and they don't speak much English. They're these East African immigrants, and there was some confusion about I think it was if they had missed a payment and it's two of them farming together, but they want to keep their finances separate. So it's like really confusing for me. And I don't think they were keeping all their invoices. And it ended up in me going to a farmer's market to pay someone and getting kind of yelled at. And I think that like the situation got resolved, and there's a woman on staff that speaks their language, and I think it ended up all being a miscommunication. But I think what it really spoke to for me is that the need to have support when you're building these relationships, because my job right now is like calling farmers, ordering from farmers, receiving from farmers, sending invoices, doing like organizational things. So like when a farmer comes up to me and says, hey, you didn't pay me, I'm like, okay, like check your invoices, check your checks, I'm pretty sure it's right, and then come back to me. Whereas if we had like more staff support, there could be someone who could take the time and sit down with them instead of like, oh God, I gotta run and go receive this person's carrots. And so I think that that's kind of caused by, yeah, just like, you have to have support for the people that are doing the work. And I don't think I think if you don't give people the right amount of support, like these sort of interpersonal relationships can kind of decay like that, because of misunderstandings. And then the other failure is there's another relationship with a farmer that has kind of soured. And his relationship is both with my organization through my program and then through other programs. And he's having land disputes and he's having issues about prices. And I think that really speaks to like tokenization and to transparency overall when working with people. Because you speak to this guy and you get down to the roots of what's going on, and it's really that he has been the face of so many grant applications, so many photo ops, and then it's like, okay, I'm getting a little bit of that money, but I know you guys just built this new building, and so I think that I'm not really sure what can be done about that because it's so entrenched in nonprofit culture, but yeah, it's just this dynamic where even when we're trying to help people and offer up services, we're still using people's stories, we're using people's likeness, and that's paying my salary, paying my coworker's salary, paying our investment on our building. And so I think it's just mindful. It's important to be mindful of that, that as much as you can, offer services, like how does that fit into the bigger picture?
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing. I actually have a question directly related to that scenario, but I'm going to pause for just a moment, and I want to open up Q questions from the audience. I saw that we had a few come in through the chat, and Ellie or Elizabeth, I think you were capturing those. So I just want to bring those questions into the conversation.
Yeah, so I've seen at least one come through. from Monica. This is a question for Jake. And Monica was asking, Jake, you mentioned working with food access organizations as a value chain for farmers. Do these food access organizations ever shy away from purchasing from the farmers that you work with because of the prices that y'all said?
There's been a tiny amount of that. I think that we're really lucky to be like first off, we're small. So we're not moving like hundreds of thousands of dollars of produce in a year like some larger food hubs are. And so like we can work, I think right now we're working with like 7 organizations. And so we can kind of choose who we work with. But for the most part, people are supportive of the mission and they understand that it's food that comes from folks who are doing like organic practices. And so they're willing to pay the higher price. And then in addition to that, we've been able to find a lot of funding through LFPA, through grants from organizations that can kind of like offset the price, or even we had one organization here, it's run through the Providence Parks Department. And last year they were doing a CSA, but then this year their money dried up. And so I was reaching out to sell to them. They're like, oh, we'd love to work with you, but we don't have any money. And so I was like, oh, guess what? We just got the LFPA. And so that's been a huge help in being able to serve folks who otherwise couldn't afford it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jake. I'm seeing one question from Karen. And Karen, I'm wondering if you would be willing to come off mute and ask your question.
Yes, thank you. I talk with several farm groups, some of which have been going on for decades, and I'm keeping pretty close eye on what's going on with the USDA. And it seems like under the Biden administration, for all the government departments, 40% of the resources are supposed to be used for people who have been traditionally left out of the picture. And they have very specific strategies and programs to benefit Indigenous and farmers of color as priority recipients of many of their grants and programs. And so I would encourage people to just look on their website if they're not familiar with some of the stuff. And some of the funding is very large amounts of money that will not be available again. They're to help build things like regional supply chains for different kinds of food, and that includes for fish as well, to try and have resources in a geographic area in a region that stays within the region, that they're developed. So I think it's a very different organization than traditionally was operational for mainly white farmers and men, for that matter. And I wonder, for Buck, have any of the groups you worked with accessed any of those funds that you know about for either fish, timber, or farm development? Because I think they signed a agreement with the Department of the Interior. This was maybe 1 year ago or so, to allow some of the federal land to be used for farming and livestock raising for Indigenous groups who really, as you pointed out, they know better than anybody from hundreds and maybe thousands of years of agriculture, right in these particular dry land areas or other areas that have special, environments. They know how to farm there, So it's just, do you know of any groups that are using these resources?
So Yeah, many of our tribes that we represent have received USDA loans. You are correct in that the USDA has, you know, tried to be more inclusive. You know, they signed an equity thing that, you know, the administration signed, and Bill South actually signed it and stuff like that. We've actually received USDA rural business development loans, you know, in the past, for some of our fishers and the individual tribes. You know, I'm not, I can't speak for them, but I know they have, I believe, obviously got some of those, you know, USDA loans, because timber is there and things like that. But so I do appreciate, you know, the USDA being a little bit more active in trying to, I guess, erase some of the pasts. But I think I brought this up in a previous conversation. Even with the LFPA, you know, we're finding out that across the board that, you know, they're not clear on their calculations. They're not telling each, you know, awardee how their formulas come up with, and how many of their different, whether it be groups within the states or even the tribes that had set aside what the formula they came up with. And so there's always going to be there. I mean, they said that, you know, I've been hearing it's like, everybody's been getting 27%, at least in my tribal groups that I'm talking about. So that, I'll just end there.
Anyway, money well spent as far as I'm concerned as a taxpayer, because it really benefits all farmers. The kind of knowledge and experience that Indigenous and also even the Hispanic history, especially in the California coastal areas, you know, they've been there farming for a long time. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your question. And, you know, I think you've raised a good point that there are right now more federal funds than really ever supporting not only local and regional food system development, but funding programs from USDA that specifically ask for a focus on sourcing from BIPOC farmers. And I want to lift up a couple comments in the chat box. One is from Monica saying that there are a lot of concerns, I think, especially amongst farmers around these programs. People asking, how long do they last? Is this going to continue beyond this administration? Are these programs going to continue into the next farm bill? And some real concerns about building up value chains around programs that may have a funding cliff. And I also want to speak to Andy's comment above that whether, you know, these are USDA programs or buyers that are seeking to work with a diversity of farmers, it really speaks to the need to be flexible and adaptive and responsive to the needs and the capacities of growers, and particularly of small growers, and building human relationships to really understand those concerns and those questions. Thanks for your questions, y'all. I'm going to pause on questions there. I think we'll come back to some more later, but I'm going to hand the mic back to Melanie.
Yeah, thank you for that. So this pretty much concludes like our panels part, but like our panelists are still here to help answer questions. But I also wanted to call on the knowledge of the audience for those of you who are also working in programs and building relationships with BIPOC farmers and growers. And so I really just wanted to see if anyone in the audience had any wisdom that they wanted to share. I see a lot of great folks in the audience, sharing great information in the chat. Yeah, so I just kind of wanted to pause there and see if anybody had anything. If you want to either raise your hand or come off mute, I can call on people too, like Monica.
Okay, I try not to talk so much, Melanie, and let other people have space. But I am relatively new to this work and to this space. I work in a hunger relief organization that traditionally just relies on that charity model of food, and we are just now transitioning to include purchasing food from farmers. We started a little of it during the pandemic, but I'm starting internally in my organization to hear comments like, oh, well, it costs too much. Oh, well, they can't meet all of our needs. So, why are we going to order from them when they can't fulfill, our needs in their entirety? And so I'm working hard to educate within my organization opinions, thoughts, and opinions around this that are enduring, that reflect what we are saying our values are, so that even when or if funding goes away, we have I don't know, created that expectation from our organization with regards to other funders. Like, this is why we do this. We support our BIPOC farmers for this reason. This, oftentimes they don't even know the history. Like, we have to go back and say, this is why. But I'm trying to build that in addition to taking advantage of the funds that have now become available, so that there is a mind shift, if you will, and they see what these farmers can provide as of value. Like, there's more to it than, hey, I purchased some green peppers from you, so it's all good.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I think that, brings up like a really important question, is like just kind of like in organizations looking at, what is their intent and impact that they are looking to achieve when reaching out to BIPOC farmers. And yeah, you have like, sometimes a large amount of money, but like, what else is there? What has the organization done historically to support BIPOC and socially disadvantaged farmers? And is this just a one-time transaction, or is this going to be a continued relationship? And I think those are very real things that every organizations need to like look into and ask themselves the questions of, what is our intent? What is our impact going to be on this? Oh, I see a hand up. Would you like to chime in? And I'm sorry, is it Andy?
Anandi.
Anandi, that's beautiful.
Yes. Hi, I'm the agricultural specialist at Second Harvest Food Bank in New Orleans, working on the LFPA grant. And we're launching on Monday. So it's been a pretty wild, a pretty wild week getting the website and everything together, but I'm super happy with how everything's come out. So I'll send you that. I'll post it in the group so y'all can see that. I had actually someone asked me what the perks of the grant would be for, like, how are we selling this? Like, what's important about it? And from what I see is that our local farmers will have a contract or an MOU for 2 years of guaranteed purchases of their produce, which usually isn't the case for small growers to have such a reliable source of guaranteed funds. Secondly, a grant specifically for purchasing from socially disadvantaged growers has been long overdue, because I keep getting, what if I'm a white farmer? What if I want in on this grant? And I'm like, yes, we are prioritizing this. So it's just a thing that keeps coming up every single time. And having to explain the history of systemic racism in the food system, particularly with the USDA denying support for BIPOC growers for generations, leading to tremendous loss of land, seeds, food, culture, and the ability to take up farming as a viable way of living. Third, there's part of this funding allocated to increase communication equity with help in building internet and Wi-Fi in rural areas. So we're excited about that. And fourth, we're able to begin to transform the inequity and injustice embedded in the food system in Louisiana to one that's focused on locally grown and locally sourced produce, meats, grains, seafood, etc. And through this grant and other resources, we'll be able to simultaneously repair bridges with our hungry neighbors living in food apartheid. And these are residents who've been denied access to healthy foods and nutritious foods because of racially discriminatory policy, political planning and policies. And so It's like, well, I'm like, well, those are our selling points and our perks as to like why this grant is important and in transforming the food system in this way. So it's not just this 2-year grant, but I'm looking even to start a coalition of Black growers here in Louisiana, because one doesn't exist yet. And so we're going to use part of the funding for that. That's what I've been hearing from our farmers.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Really, yeah, I don't even have words, because you just really covered so much of like a lot of the criticism and critique that we're hearing from farmers on the ground that are like, why can't I participate? So thank you for sharing that. That's really, really helpful and insightful. I think we have about 15 minutes left. And I still kind of want to, keep this going and see like if anyone else has any other wisdom or knowledge to share. I really want to invite that into the conversation. I also think that this is a good opportunity to put on a plug to remind everyone that we have a national survey where we're collecting information on farm to food assistance market channels. We really want to know, how are these programs helpful? We're hoping to what you spoke to is like increased funding. We need more funding. We need, more years. We need more money. We need for these programs to continue to help support BIPOC and socially disadvantaged farmers, and to feed our communities. So Ellie and I just popped the link in the chat. Thank you, Ellie. If you have not taken the survey, please take the survey. And if you know a farmer that's participating in a farm to food assistance program, so any of you that are running any of these programs, please ask the farmers to take the survey. We need more farmer input on this, as well as food hubs. There's an opportunity for you to win $250. We're doing 5 drawings. We've done 2 drawings so far, and we have 3 left. So, that's a little extra money for the holidays. However you might celebrate the holidays, could be in your pocket there. Or support your programs if you want to use them for that as well. Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. Way better odds at winning than the Powerball. Anything else? Anyone else that would like to add anything? Ava or Andy, who are, our amazing COP facilitators as well. If you have anything that you wanted to chime into this conversation, or if there's any unanswered questions that, we haven't really dove into, we might have a few more minutes to kind of explore some more questions.
I don't know if Jake is still here. Okay, I can see his name. So we in Rhode Island are LFPA sole subcontractor with the state, and what we did to meet the requirements of the LFPA award was actually to sub out a chunk of that funding to Jake at Southside Community Land Trust. And what we did was we recognized that we have local experts on doing this who have worked with for decades communities of color specifically, and that we all do better when we support the organizations in our community who have the historical knowledge, the on the ground connections, and the support of the people that they've been working with for a really, really long time. And that is the appropriate thing to do. And the way that this program was written really allowed us to give a lot of autonomy to all of the different organizations, when we really dug into the reporting component. And I think that one of the components of trust is autonomy, right? To be able to say, like, here's the full transparent reporting requirements that we have, here's what we need from you. And beyond that, like, live your best life, like figure out how you need to do this in a way that supports your community and supports your organization. Whether or not that's the experience that Jake and Southside Community Land Trust have been having. Hopefully it is, I'm pretty sure it is, but that was our intention. And then to sort of try and keep the lines of communication open around that and say, like, is this working for you? How is it working for you? How is it working for the farmers? That type of thing. So I just think like being honest and being like honoring the relationship and the trust that already exists, rather than somehow trying to like manufacture additional or like doing extra work. I guess I hope that I'm making sense. I guess that's what I would say. That feels like a good strategy.
Yeah, and I can speak to that more. We've been able to bring that money in and use it really nicely for programs that have already been established. We have our VeggieRx program, which is like the produce prescription thing. And through the LFPA money, we've been able to, I think we've done maybe like 50 more shares every 2 weeks than we would have been able to without the money. We're able to serve the Providence Rec department, we're running like a small program with them. We've done like a lot of giveaways at community events. Next week we're going to be giving away like tea with our last VeggieRx box. Like, it's just really helped us to like enhance the programs that we have, and just to like piggyback on other events that we're doing within the community. And so it's been super seamless, and I know our farmers like appreciate the extra income, so it's been great from our side.
Thank you, Jake. And one quick plug, I guess, like Andy and I have been thinking about topics for different calls moving forward. And this idea of like long-term sustainability for programs like this, like these are public funds that are going to public use to serve the public good. And this is, as one of the folks said, this is a great use of our tax dollars, and we have to keep advocating for our tax dollars to continue to be used in this way. And I think that is one of the strategies for sustainability, is to say, like, let's fight for it then. It's working. Let's keep fighting, and let's think about how we can all fight for it together and all keep advocating for it together and see how we can grow it and build it and make it stronger. And like, yeah, I just keep thinking like, I'm not going to give away a bunch of money to farmers. Like, even if we don't know if it's going to be around forever, like I still want to get that money out the door. And then we work on the problem of how to keep it flowing and how to keep those resources coming, and building the case and gathering the stories and thinking about the data that supports that this is really impactful and really matters.
Thank you, Ava, and thank you, everyone. I think it was a really insightful conversation, and I think the theme of trust is really interesting to me, and how it's really like lines of trust and chains of trust. What I think we're seeing show up as far as sort of a consistent model is similar to what Ava was sharing, is that Farm Fresh Rhode Island is subbing out to groups like Jake. And then that makes Farm Fresh Rhode Island accountable to, monitoring the good work and supply chains and value chains that Jake is doing. And we similarly, hold the relationship with Cecilia and sub out funding, eventually the LFPA, when ours gets signed. Congratulations, New Orleans or Louisiana. But for now, it's like that autonomy we hope to be passing on to Cecilia, and knowing that she's doing good work, we collect some amount of data to like verify it, but all of the like choice in purchasing and relationships is being passed down to the experts on the ground who are working with the smallest growers. So I just like want to call out to, government agencies who are here or watching the LFPA, like that's how the funding is being best utilized. I think we're all seeing is when it's being, not going directly from the government to farms, but through agencies who have built trust, networks of trust that we can be accountable to. So thank you all for that. I think that conversation.
Thank you. Thank you both for all of that. I just wanted to invite our speakers, Cecilia, Jake, and Buck, back, and just, if you had any closing thoughts, like anything to share with folks that would, really help them on this journey, or anything maybe you didn't have a chance to say that you would really like to share with everyone here, I just want to welcome y'all back for closing words.
Well, I don't have anything to add, but yeah, I just want to say thank you for inviting me to speak here. And I just want to thank Andy for always, helping us out. And he's done a great job. Yeah, we're very thankful. Like, I am thankful, but I know the farmers are like 10 times thankful to him and what he's doing and the great work that he is doing. So thank you all.
Jake or Buck, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I want to echo that and just express my appreciation for being invited here. And then I think one takeaway for me is just how different all of these models can be. There's been a few things people have said that I'm like reaching out in the comments, like, hey, we got to talk about this. And so, yeah, I think it's just interesting that there's so many different perspectives and models that can all be successful.
Yeah, thanks again for the opportunity. Something that I think would Andy, I wanted to kind of piggyback off of or whatever, is that some of these collaborative efforts, at least for us for our LFPA, once we get going, is we're using it kind of like a demonstration project, to kind of USDA allowed us to put salmon in some of these food boxes. So it's kind of a neat little project, where that it will impact our individual fishers, and and that's what I've appreciated about this, working with the Native Farm Bill Coalition to get some of these USDA capacity things where they are viable for small farmers, people of color farmers, instead of having 5 million metric tons of of a product, and that's the only way you can become part of this or whatever. I think is a really neat opportunity with this LFPA, and I think that it is we do have to take advantage of these things when they're the funding is there. It may have already started to change, with the midterms here and stuff like that. But once again, just thanks a lot for this opportunity and allowing us to voice our projects, voicing what we feel is our, the mistrust and the things that have happened. And I also wanted to say too that I really appreciated I don't know what you guys call it, the opening that you had for all the presenters or whatever, because as a tribal person, the politically correct thing for groups to do is like acknowledgements and things like that. And don't get me wrong, they're fine or whatever, but what else are you going to do for us besides just acknowledge the land, make some action and make it happen. So I appreciate that set of standards or guides that you had, or within the riverbank. I can't remember the exact term, but I appreciate that.
Thank you so much. Thank you. All right. Well, we're coming to a close here, and I look forward to chatting with you all again next month. When is our next community of practice date? Look, I should know this.
I actually looked it up because I was like, oh, we're going to need to have this information. So our next call is December 8th at 3 Eastern, 12 Pacific. And I think we're shaping up a conversation around production planning and forward contracting, some of those sort of tools and skills that might be helpful as you move into the winter season and are planning for next spring. And Mel and Elizabeth have shared these links in the chat a few times, but I just wanted to lift up the survey again. We're gathering a bunch of information to understand what's going on in this farm to food assistance world, what's working, what's needed, and trying to package that so that we can, advocate for more support and also continue to provide services to those of you on the ground that are making these things happen. The other thing Elizabeth shared once, but I think I'm going to share again, is we have a discussion group that goes alongside this community of practice, where you can ask questions, share resources, and just connect with each other in another forum besides these calls. So recommending that you all go check that out as another way to communicate with each other. But also, we love people DMing each other in the Zoom chats and sharing emails. That works amazing too.
Yeah.
And I think, Mel, yeah, you want to close this out?
Yeah, I'm just gonna put in one more plug of where you can also get information from us. We're on Instagram. If you're on Instagram, please follow us. And we're gonna put up a post about the survey coming up. So share it with your friends and community, please. We would love to get more folks aware of this survey and a broader range of folks. So I know we're at time, so I'll stop there. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for all the knowledge that was shared here. Thank you for everyone for tuning in and being active listeners. And we look forward to seeing you again next month. Please take the survey, and I hope you win. Have a great day. Do y'all want to come off of mute and kind of give like a goodbye, like noise, a good
Thanks,
bye
everybody.
celebratory sound?
Yay.
Thank
Night.
you.
Bye.
Have a good one.
Bye. Thanks,
Bye, bye.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.